our stores are heading towards, and even our DCs, for the same reason, are heading towards kind of the sensorization of product. So in the future, in the next 5 years, every product is going to have a sensor on it. And that will enable us to have complete inventory transparency. That will enable, the associates in store to know, where things are, if they've been misplaced, if there's out of stock, low stock situations. And that can all show up on this ThingSpace platform, and really be able to give us a much better view of what's happening in the store.
Today on Customer Land, I'm back with Katie Riddle, who is Global Retail Strategy Lead at Verizon Business. I say I'm back because not only is this the second in a two-part conversation we started much earlier this year, but we've spoken multiple times in the interim, just trying to reset this conversation up. So with all that, Katie, thanks a million. Been looking forward to this for a while.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here, and there's so much to talk about of what's going on in the retail industry right now.
I think we left off the earlier conversation by saying we had only scratched the surface of what we really needed to talk about. So
Right.
I've been collecting notes and taking notes, and I've got two sides here of stuff to go through, but maybe be helpful just to set a little bit of context for listeners. What Verizon Business is, because Verizon is a super well-known brand, but maybe Verizon Business is less so, and then your role there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Verizon Business, there's two parts of Verizon. There's consumer, which everyone's familiar with, and then there's the business or organization. And the business organization does enterprise level networking, security, IoT services for large businesses like a Target or a Walmart. Small and medium businesses, and then the public sector. So we do a lot of business with the government and with federal, state, and local, emergency services and things like that. So it's several billion of our global, billions of dollars that Verizon is worth. But it is the smaller half of the equation. And as far as what I do, I sit at the nexus of kind of three things. One is Verizon's own store innovation. So I'm in very tight contact and communication with our store innovations folks and how we're evolving our stores, how customers are shopping, what we're doing to service them better, what we're doing to make our associates' lives easier and better. Then the other part is that enterprise level retail organization of clients. So, I basically talk to everyone from A to Z that is a Fortune 500 company within the retail spectrum. And then the last thing that I touch is product development. So I take all the feedback that I'm getting from our consumer side as well as our clients and feed that back into the product organization to make sure that what they are delivering meets retailers' needs and isn't simply a horizontal solution that's a kind of a force fit. We want to come up with solutions that meet the business outcomes that retailers really need. So that's what I do, and that's what Verizon Business does.
So you can see why there's just an awful lot to talk about. So as often happens in these kinds of conversations, the real challenge is to keep it from sprawling out of control and doglegging and rabbit trailing off into space somewhere. So I'll work hard to do that. But if it happens, so be it. There's just a lot to talk about here. Let's first start with your perspective on, I'm kind of struggling for the right word here, but I think you have to call it infrastructure to support all of these new technologies in retail. Infrastructure is not a sexy word. It's not even a sexy concept, frankly, but it underpins almost every one of the technological innovations that you and I see in retail. Some of the really cool things are out there. It all requires infrastructure to make it work. And I think it might be helpful to just get your perspective on, say, what that looked like 3 years ago, or even a year ago, what the tasks, responsibilities, duties looked like then, what they look like now, and where you think they might be going in the short term, because things are changing very, very fast.
Yeah, that's a big question because things definitely have changed a lot in the last couple of years. I would say we see a lot of business transformation. So we see a lot of de-siloification of business, and that can be everything from the CMO of an organization is actually now speaking to the CIO, making sure that what marketing needs to implement that the IT organization can then put in place in store or in their call centers or whatever that might be. So it's breaking down those walls of between different functional areas. It's also breaking down the walls between data, different data ponds that organizations have, and really once that all comes together, that's what we call enterprise intelligence. Once you have unified integrated systems that run across organizations, and I think that's something that a lot of businesses have spent the last couple of years really trying to achieve. So I think that's one thing, just the unification and integration of the business. The second thing would be, connectivity. So what do you need to support the business? What do you need to support, corporate infrastructure? What do you need to support store infrastructure, distribution center infrastructure, fleet infrastructure? If own your own, delivery fleet. So I think, those needs, really what, a lot of retailers are doing right now is they have found whatever they can find in the local market in terms of broadband connectivity, but they're starting to see that that is not going to suffice in the even right now, but well into the near term. So starting to look at things like fixed wireless access for for retailers that have a lot of smaller format locations, things like private 5G for larger footprint stores. And then the last thing that I'll mention is in the next year or two, even if you're planning for the future today, I mean, I would almost say double what you think you are going to need in the future, because as AI really, as you said, we're scratching the surface now. All of the queries and the data lakes and things that are going to be needed to access to make AI tools work for both associates and for customers, that's going to require so much more bandwidth and low latency connections than we ever imagined. So I think, it's whatever you're planning for the next couple years, plan big, because you're going to need, I think, more than we can even imagine right now.
Interesting. All right, we're gonna put that one down there under future predictions. You said something a minute ago about the desiloization, which we're going to turn into an actual word. Um, and because of a necessity of it, but that's something that technology providers, specifically in the retail space, have been nudging loudly enterprises to undertake with, I would say even now, limited success. So it's really interesting for me to hear you say that you're seeing some of that kind of collaboration and cross-pollination out there, because it's, people are fighting corporate cultures and the technologies that don't play nice together, and a whole host of, your personal bonuses that rely on a whole different set of KPIs, trying to bind these, or at least give the data ponds, you say, access to one another. So these are giant hurdles, and I'm loving the fact that you're saying you're seeing progress there. That's a
Mhm.
really big deal. And I think coming from your perspective at the top of the pyramid, so to speak, but you have that really high level perspective, that's really encouraging.
Well, I think, one thing that we're starting to see is all of the C-level areas of the company becoming a little more co-equal. So it used to be, well, in terms of technology, at least. So it used to be that, the CIO or CTO, basically owned all of the IT and, the technology and the connectivity, within the company. And they drove, tried to assess what the needs were and, drove the solutions. But it's starting to we're starting to see movement where, the COO, the operations organization, the marketing and digital organizations, they all have needs that have to be satisfied by that technology, whether that's in store or, in other channels of the retail ecosystem. And so we see the business driving technology needs more than they ever have before. And what that also means is funding those initiatives more than they ever have before. So, potentially there's a lot more partnering with the CIO, CTO organizations with funding that they want to create, say AR VR experience in store. Well, that's not something that IT would necessarily bring forward on its own, but the business is driving ideas like that and even funding, ideas like that.
Seems like so many of these conversations, like you're saying, the C-level executives are becoming, well, at least technologically speaking, more co-equal, but that so many C-suite conversations now are out of necessity technology questions. They're technology discussions. You can't avoid it. It is no longer simply the purview of the CTO or CIO or CMO if they have a request for something. There is kind of a holistic need out there. So just to restate it, I'm pleased that at least in your corner of the universe, you're seeing progress in that direction. Because a lot of people, a lot of technology providers are still kind of going, oh, this is a great solution if only we could get A to talk to B, left hand to right hand, that kind of thing.
Well, I think they're realizing too, at the very basic level, that technology is part of your brand, because technology is a lot about how people interact with your brand or are serviced by your brand. And if you don't have great technology that's making life easy and sometimes even enabling people to not even notice it's there, then, your brand kind of suffers from, things like slow POS or, lines or, queues or, things like that, or mispricing, when you could have had, digital shelf labels. So, yeah, it's part of the brand these days.
In an earlier conversation, you had mentioned the concept that I don't think was quite a reality yet in your world, but I could be wrong, that that what brands, especially enterprise level organizations, really need, because of the complexity they're dealing with, is something that looks like a single pane of glass into the various kind of operational collections.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, as a concept, that rocks. I mean, that's transformative for a lot of really complex organizations. Is Verizon, I should just ask, where is Verizon in kind of developing that capability? You can optimize for NPS, and that's good. You can optimize for CSAT, also good. You can optimize for loyalty, and that's good too. But here's the thing. If you're not optimizing for total customer value, for total customer profitability, then you're just optimizing for output, not the bottom line. Here's the truth. If your strategy isn't building better customers, more frequent, more loyal, more deeply bonded, then it's not a strategy, it's a performance. At Customerland Studio, we help brands find the value, find the opportunities, the force multipliers hiding inside the customer relationship. And then we help them optimize for scale, for yield, for profit across the entire relationship. Because the other thing we've learned, the only strategy that actually matters is the one that makes your customers more profitable. Customerland Studio, to make better customers. Go to customerland.net and click on the studio.
So we actually have a dashboard, pane of glass that is available today, but it's centered around our IoT capabilities. And that can be anything from, in grocery, fresh, refrigeration, freezers, things like that. as well as like the physical plant of the building, whether that's HVAC or leak sensitivity or door swing sensors that sense people in unauthorized areas. But IoT is also the digital shelf labels that I just mentioned. It can be, devices, it can be anything. And basically the tool is called ThingSpace, and it is device agnostic. So it's basically sort of a plug and play, easy way to connect all of your IoT devices and see what's going on within your store. And the reason that I find that really valuable is because our stores are heading towards, and even our DCs, for the same reason, are heading towards kind of the sensorization of product. So in the future, in the next 5 years, every product is going to have a sensor on it. And that will enable us to have complete inventory transparency. That will enable, the associates in store to know, where things are, if they've been misplaced, if there's out of stock, low stock situations. And that can all show up on this ThingSpace platform, and really be able to give us a much better view of what's happening in the store. Because today, we have kind of this, when we look at e-commerce, we know what people are doing on e-commerce pages. We know when people put things in their cart or take them out, or even eye tracking in some cases. So we really know what's happening at a very granular level. We don't have that in store today, which is why I really believe as the cost of RFID comes down, and in the per sticker area, and this pervasive connectivity is available in store. I think that one pane of glass is really going to tell us a lot more about this sort of data desert in the middle of the store. But it is available today. It's just that not everything is sensorized. And so I think it's got a couple more years before it's got that really 360, view of everything in store. But it can still do a lot today with IoT in the store, and monitoring store operations and everything that's going on within the store from a physical perspective.
So it's really right now, it's only because not everything's sensorized.
Right.
The market hasn't quite caught up to the big technology yet.
Right.
I'd like to kind of go back to something you talked about a little earlier, and that is that organizations should be looking at planning for more compute power, more bandwidth, more power overall than they're probably currently thinking about.
Right.
And what's driving that kind of prediction? Because that's a big deal. I think, people who are managing the budgets for this thing, if they're listening to this podcast, they're probably going, uh-oh, if Katie Riddle, who sits at the top of Verizon business retail section, is saying we may be under budgeting for this, maybe I should pay attention to it. So let's talk about some of the things that you see driving that increased need.
Mm-hmm. And first of all, I want to acknowledge that, we meet anybody where they are today and take those steps. We understand that a lot of times these things have to be phased approaches, that you can't necessarily get to tomorrow, immediately today. So I just want to say that, I don't expect, organizations to go out and spend $50 million, tomorrow on, whatever it is, but, a 10, 20, 10, type of arrangement. We know that that's the way things have to be sometimes from a budget perspective. So I would say the reason that, I'm sort of making that bold prediction is that we still don't know what AI is going to do within organizations. So, we have tools that, we're putting out there for the associates, for customers, so that they can start searching for things in plain language. And that takes a lot of compute. We see every day stories about, companies building new data centers, everywhere. Those are eating up a lot of power. So at the same time they're eating up power, they need connectivity as well, because these queries take a lot of data to go back and forth. And the other thing is, the compute aspect, we don't want to have to go back to data centers for every piece of compute. We want to do computing at the edge, which is something that we do offer, because that results in a lot faster return of information. And in order for AI to be valuable, it has to be very fast. It can't be, that you're waiting a couple seconds, for answers. It has to be very fast. So I just think we're scratching the surface. We're on the tip of the iceberg in terms of what AI is going to cost us, because AI is going to do great things for us in terms of productivity gains, in terms of customer satisfaction, but it's going to cost us, and that's not just in development of the tool or whatever itself. It's of all of the infrastructure that supports it. And I just don't think that we all have our arms around what that will actually mean in terms of infrastructure.
Makes me think that your team and my team should put their heads together and maybe index what those costs are now and what they're predicted to be over the next few years. Could be an interesting project.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about one of the other giant compute sucks, wrong word, but you get where I'm going with this. Retail media networks.
Mm-hmm.
Every organization has one. If they don't, they will soon. The commerce media networks that are expanding beyond just physical stores or even just, house entities, is sprawling. The money that's being poured into retail networks and similar networks is giant and doesn't look like it's going to let up anytime soon. I mean, when you saw a couple of years ago when these things first emerged, people predicting that it was going to suck the life out of digital media and like, where's all the budget going to go? And well, it can't possibly be true. Turns out it's not only is it true, but that was probably a small view of it. But all of that takes compute. All of that takes infrastructure. All of that takes, the behind the scenes, the under the hood, the behind the curtain work that Verizon does. So can we talk a little bit about what you see behind that curtain, what's working and what it takes to make it work?
Sure. I think most retail media networks, have started with, e-commerce and in-app type ads, trying to either position them, as you're shopping or as you're browsing, if you're making a grocery list at home, putting those ads in front of you. And I think they've reached, a good level of success doing that. I think the thing that people have not been doing as much is putting up the digital displays in the stores. I haven't seen those as much as I would have expected. And there's so many different form factors for those digital displays. There's ones that are just horizontal rails. There's, tiny ones that are the size of a paperback book. There's huge ones, so, those require connectivity. And, I think the reality is for larger format stores, at least, we're going to see a mix of cellular connectivity, 5G connectivity, and Wi-Fi supporting things like this, because you don't want, even though your retail media network is making you a lot of money, it's not necessarily a critical system like POS is. So you don't necessarily want them running on the same network or being serviced in the same way at the same speed. But going back to retail media networks, we really, even if you did have a lot of monitors in the store and you designed them in a way that was, fairly unobtrusive to the shopper, you still need proof that they're working, that eyeballs are on those screens. And that's another thing that we are doing. We have a product called 5G Video Insights. And what that does is it uses cameras, usually existing cameras, anything that's an IP camera, to watch people as they are approaching a screen. And we're not doing any facial recognition just to avoid that conversation. But just, aggregating the data of watching people as they approach the screen. Did they watch the ad for, let's say, Oreos? And, when they watch that ad, did they put a bag of Oreos into their cart? So that's the way you really prove back to the CPGs who are doing this advertising and paying you as Kroger, as Target, or whoever it might be. That's the way you prove to them that this is valuable. That's the way you prove to them that placement on an end cap or wherever that high value, placement might be, that's worth the extra money to place your items there. So that's another thing that Verizon does, not only providing the sheer connectivity for the retail media networks to run on cellular connectivity, on Wi-Fi connectivity, but also providing some of that, IoT, camera, um, which is camera vision, which is backed by AI. So it's using AI to aggregate activity and watching, what people are doing in order to prove out the value of the RMN, which I think is something that you can do in a very you can make some assumptions and do today, but it can remove some of those assumptions from the ball field.
Right. And what you just mentioned, every one of those steps is in itself a giant data load into the
Mm-hmm.
system. I mean,
Yep.
collectively, you're talking about an awful lot of bandwidth needed there.
Yeah, video requires a lot of bandwidth to process. Yep.
Just huge. And if it's going back and forth to be
Mm-hmm.
analyzed the whole time in real time or close to that, you can just imagine the pipes you need.
Yeah.
So looking across everything Verizon's working on right now, networks, sensors, insights, security, what's the larger story you think retailers need to hear right now?
I think retailers need to hear that they do need to plan ahead for the next 2 to 3 years, and they need to plan for infrastructure. Like I said, that's more than they need today. But I think the other thing that we really talk to a lot of retailers about and do a lot of research, on a yearly basis is that security issues, cyber theft, cyber crime, is still skyrocketing. For every step that we take to block out bad actors, they are figuring out something else and another approach to committing cyber crime. So I think that's something that is worth spending time to think through. And as you add all of these endpoints, all of these IoT devices, all of these mobility devices for associates, you have consumers in store that are using your Wi-Fi. As we have all these endpoints, the security threat gets worse and worse. So that's something that we can really help with. We have a gentleman who sits on, the president's, cybercrime, council. I'm saying that the wrong way, but you get the idea. And we see something like 75% of the world's internet traffic. So it's something that we can really start to see things happening before they start to really pick up steam. And that's something that we can help retailers with. We can help avoid all of the brand damage that's done when there are breaches. We can help, the financial, implications for any breaches, especially for ransomware and other things. So I think, not only planning the overall infrastructure bigger than you think it needs to be, but I think the security needs to match that.
So I'm trying to put a timeline on that, and I'm not sure it's possible, but because I get asked this question a lot, where do I see, as if my opinion has any validity, where do I see things going over the next 18 to 24 months? On the other hand, I think you're a great person to talk about that. What are some of the hurdles? What are some of the things that you see retailers should be paying attention to, should be planning for? You've already said, increase your energy data load planning more than you think you will. But are there any specific, call them traffic bumps in the road ahead that you think retailers may not see, but by virtue of the fact that you sit at that 30,000 foot level, you can see them where people down here at street level may not?
I'm not sure that there's necessarily, a whole lot more than what I've mentioned. I will bring up sustainability, though. So, sustainability, we're starting to see a lot within the retail industry, and it's going beyond, at first, um, I think a lot of companies in general, not just in retail, we're sort of doing, okay, we're looking at our carbon footprint, we're, doing things, but they were sort of vague. And I think even more than ever before, customers really want to vote with their dollars and go with retailers that live up to the same values that they both share. So I think you start to see the circular economy within retail. So you start to see a lot of used clothing coming back. I know that Madewell does that, which is part of J. Crew. There are so many companies that are starting to bring back clothing. I believe Patagonia does that. So that's just an example. Within the grocery industry, you see a lot of things to battle food waste. We saw IKEA, not that they're a grocer, but we saw IKEA sign a deal just recently with a company that will take all of their cafeteria waste, all of those delicious Swedish meatballs that they have left over at the end of the day, and they take it and they make energy out of it somehow. I think it's some sort of biomass play, so that food isn't actually wasted. I talked a little bit earlier about IoT sensors with the freezers and refrigerators in grocery stores, avoiding problems before they even happen, seeing things that need preventative maintenance before they even break down in terms of refrigerators and freezers. So I think we're going to see even more measures that really have very meaningful, meaningful measurements and meaningful impacts that are sustainability related. And I don't think that's on anybody's bingo list for 2026 necessarily, but I think it's this quiet thing that is growing and growing and growing, and we're going to see more more initiatives into 26, 27, 28.
I'm stuck on the Swedish meatballs. Hard for me to believe that they couldn't sell every one of those things. Amazing.
Yep.
Well, Katie, thanks so much for your time and your insight, and I'd say your perspective, because it's unique and it's valuable. And maybe for version 3 of this conversation, it won't be another 6 months. Maybe we can do it sooner, but I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.